Right now on Tech Radio, why Apple's new Mac Mini might be the only computer you'll ever need.
Hi, I'm Artemis. I am a computer-generated AI voice, and you're listening to Tech Radio.
Every week online and on air with RT Radio, we bring you the latest in tech from Ireland and across the world. You're welcome to episode 1042, brought to you in association with SureSkills, delivering solutions to overcome your technology, knowledge and learning challenges. Later on in the show, we'll be talking operational resilience and why you should care about it with SureSkills' Kevin O'Connor. Also, we're going to be looking back on the 7 biggest stories of the week, including how much AI is costing your favourite artists. Of course, we've got all the new toys from Apple to go over. And for Halloween this weekend, famous dead people are making podcasts.
From techcentral.ie, this is Tech Radio with Dusty Rhodes and Niall Kitson.
I'm Dusty. Joining me as always is Niall Kitson. Niall, you're looking very happy. I'm going to stop that immediately.
Oh, right. Okay.
Are you going to claim responsibility for the article on the website which read Apple impresses with Mac Mini redesign?
To a certain extent.
To a certain extent.
Not to the last word, I guess, when you look at what's up there, what is being released. I am impressed in the sense that we are going M4 and that it retains a very small form factor. It's about the size of my Apple TV, which probably shows how old a version of Apple TV I have. And it seems to be packing in all the gubbins of a proper desktop PC in a Mac, with Mac OS, with an M4 processor, which means that it's going to be all about Apple Intelligence. So all that's pretty impressive.
Well, listen, I would say that I'm 50-50 on it. I'm 50 kind of like, wow. And then 50 is like, come on. All right. The dramatically smaller, like when you look at all of the stuff that Apple have made, yes, it's dramatically smaller. But the thing is, at that size, mini PCs have been that size for years. So we're just getting a typical Apple thing where they've been looking at what's been happening around the rest of the world and then they do their own version of it. And then they go, wow, look at this. It's brand new. No, it's not. It's 4 years old, actually. So kind of the size wise, I'm not particularly impressed with because I have seen it and I've used those PCs with Windows PCs they are, and they're great. They are absolutely fantastic. So Apple have kind of caught up on that. I'm also not particularly impressed. What do we always say about when you're buying something? Always get the even number, never buy the odd number. So the M1 came out and that was the first one. M2 was the one that I jumped in on and it's very good. M3 came along and it was, yeah, okay. And then M4 would have been good, I would have expected, but it's not. It's kind of, they say that the M4 processor is twice as fast as the M1. It's like, are we at the 4th iteration and it's only twice as fast as the first one? So no, I wasn't particularly impressed with that. The neural engine on it is impressive. The neural engine is what drives the AI on the M4 processor, and that's gone from 18 trillion operations a second to 38 trillion. That's a massive jump, okay? Yeah. And also on the good side, and this is the best feature that Apple have done. I think they've done it across all of the range with the Mac Mini, certainly with the MacBook Air and stuff like that. Comes now with, as standard, at no extra price, with 16 gigs of RAM.
Now, that is one thing that I have faulted Macs on in the past, is that they always seem to be underpowered when it came to RAM, and the cost of upgrading RAM is absolutely prohibitive. It's ridiculous, and because it's like fused into the board now, isn't it? So yeah. It's like if you want to get better, you have to order it. You can't really upgrade it unless you bring it into an outlet. One of their own stores or an accredited outlet. And there aren't that many of those. So to see something start with 16 gigs of RAM is encouraging. I think most laptops out there will start at 8 now.
Yeah. Most PCs, we've said that for ages. Most PCs will kind of start at 8, and Apple started at 8 as well. But 8 is not enough. Not these days. You need 16 gigs minimum.
Yeah. Well, I think my phone is 8 gigs of RAM. Like when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, you know, your computer has to be a little bit more powerful than your phone. I think it's fair.
Yeah.
So 16 gigs to start in that kind of form factor. And are we going to be fleeced on price again?
No, we are not, because they are keeping it at the same price. So it's $729, including VAT for the basic Mac Mini.
Okay.
Then if you want to go for the Pro, here's the thing, right? You're going to spend an extra €1,000 to go for the Pro version. It's literally 1,700 quid and 700 quid for the Mac Basic. However, I would say, and I'm going to tell you more about the Mac Pro in a minute and the iMac and stuff like that. All right, when you hear the price of that, you're going to go, whoa. But at €729 for the Mac Mini M4, regardless of the size, that's irrelevant. All right, great buy. An absolute great buy. If anybody is using Macintosh and they're used to the OS and stuff like that, I would say absolutely get it. One of the best computers you can buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Compared now to the MacBook Pro, all right? The MacBook Pro will be very much like the Mac Mini, except it's in laptop form, of course. And they're saying with the battery now, between improvements in the battery and AI and stuff like that, controlling the battery life, that they can get 24-hour battery life out of it, which is great. Now, the MacBook Pro is an amazing machine. I've had many over the years, okay? And they are used left, right, and center. However, here's the thing, right? The 14-inch MacBook Pro starts at $2,000.
These days, come on.
Yeah.
It's like, tell us you don't want people to be buying this without saying you don't want people to be buying this. I mean, the most popular laptop in the world is the MacBook Air. Simply in a large part because there are so few of them in that range in terms of models.
Right? Gotcha. Yeah.
Whereas the PC market is completely fragmented across brands. So, you know, if your option is, you know, one of 3 versions of a MacBook Air versus hundreds of, you know, dozens anyway of mainstream PC brands, you know, it's kind of, it's not as impressive as it sounds. Like Windows will have 95% of the operating system market. But I mean, if you look at the actual sales, I think Lenovo is on top at the moment with Dell in second. It tends to be sort of flipping between the two with HP in third. So yeah, I use a HP and it's an excellent machine. And you get a lot of bang for your buck.
Thing with the MacBook Air, and I had one and I absolutely loved it. All right. And one of the reasons I loved it was because I was able to run Mac OS, which is what I do all my creative stuff on, but I was also able to run Windows on it as an alternative system. And that's what I would use all my Office-y stuff and internet and whatever, like, you know. But you can't do that with the M processors, unfortunately. However, the MacBook Air starting, if you want an M2 processor, which is still a great processor, it's still $1,250. Which I think is, when you compare that to what you might get for a PC laptop, now it might be a little bit heavier and chunkier, because those, like the Samsung books, Galaxy books and stuff, are really light and slim and stuff like that, very nice, but they're pricey. However, we're not talking about the Air because that didn't get any kind of a refresh this week. It was the Mac Mini did. Okay, so yeah, it's smaller. The actual insides are kind of, I don't think they're any much greater than the M3 or even the M2. But at 730 quid, I think is an amazing buy. The MacBook Pro, brilliant machine, $2,000. You know, now $2,000 is where I'm kind of going, right? If I want the Pro version, okay, because I'm a creator and I would want the Pro version with the bigger screen, 16-inch, and have the Max processor, so I'm completely maxed out, €5,000.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
4,800 to be precise, but nevertheless, you know, and even if you take the VAT off that, you're still looking at, about $4,000 or something like that for a laptop. I think, kind of a lot of companies will still kind of go, if a company is buying it. The iMac, again, it's kind of, it's up to M4. It's just kind of a little bit better. But they start at 1,500.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, at least you're getting everything.
That's an all-in-one home PC.
It is, yes. It's just not quite as portable as the MacBook Pro. But anyway, they're expensive. I mean, they're good, but they're expensive, which is bringing me kind of right back to the Mac Mini, okay, where I am impressed with what it delivers for the price. €729 for a really nice, small, powerful computer. I think that's a terrific price.
Yeah, looks good. It looks good as well. I'm a fan.
Elsewhere with Apple, they have announced that iOS 18, I mean, it's kind of out there in the world, but they're saying that here in the EU, we're not going to get it until April.
Really? They've gone that far out?
Next year. What have we got? So it's November, December, January, February. Oh, I'm tired counting already. March, April, 6 months.
Yeah. Well, this is, so they can bring Apple Intelligence into line with GDPR.
Yeah.
So
I don't care. As a punter, I don't care. They announced this last summer, okay? And it's not going to be available until next April. What the hell? That's why I remember years ago, Phil Collins announced a concert, and more people do it. We've had one recently. Oasis, there's a great example, all right? So Oasis, when was it? In September, they sold the tickets for a concert that's happening next July.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, that's madness. It drives me nuts. However, work around our favorite words. All you got to do on your iPhone is set the language and Siri to US English, and you'll get some of the AI features.
Oh, interesting.
You didn't hear that from me, okay? Because I don't want to be arrested by the EU fun police.
Fun police. Okay.
Also, the other thing with iOS 18 is if you have the AirPods Pro 2, and this does work in the EU, you can start doing your hearing aid test. And they're saying that they're so good at noise cancellation that people will just wear them all the time. and the one that really made me laugh the most, right? You can even wear them to a concert. It's like, why would you go to a concert to not hear the music?
Well, in fairness, I've been to a couple of gigs that have just been a little bit too loud for me. So if there was something with reasonable noise cancellation that could turn things down a little bit, I wouldn't mind that.
All right, next story, old man Kitson.
Yeah.
So iPhone related, I suppose. An iPhone 16. If you're in Indonesia, we think being in the EU is bad with Apple Intelligence, but if you're in Indonesia and you want an iPhone 16, not quite so easy to do. Why?
Yeah, forget about it. If you want to get an iPhone 16, models before that, fine. If you want an iPhone 16, not going to happen. Apparently, the Indonesian government came out and said, look, we're a huge market here. We've got 250 million people. We've got 350 million smartphones currently activated. We're giving you guys a heap of cash. When are we going to see some investment back into our economy? We're not terribly into your share buybacks. That's to a certain extent your business. So what we would like to do is we want to see you invest in our country. And Apple agreed to investing just under €1 billion in Indonesia, which included things like, swapping out components from things that they might be using in China. It's a pretty smart thing to start moving away from China for components anyway. It's a good idea to diversify and put some more redundancy in your supply chain. So Apple, they committed to €1 billion. They failed to fulfill their promise, to which the Indonesian government said, okay, forget about it. You're not allowed sell or market your iPhone 16. It is not illegal to own an iPhone 16. If you happen to go somewhere, buy one, you can bring it back into the country. You can, use it. The devices themselves aren't illegal. It's just the sale and marketing of them. No go in Indonesia right now. This is not to say that it's going to be forever. I mean, Indonesia has a massive market. They've got 100 million people under the age of 30. Apple should be looking at this and going, why aren't we playing in here? Why aren't we doing things Indonesia's way? It's a market that will pretty much be self-sustaining. Let's do it. If we can promise to make iPhones using American components in America, well, there's no reason why we couldn't do similar in Indonesia. Indonesia actually had a thing about batteries. It was to do with, now if memory serves, it was like if you were assembling a product and it had a lithium-ion battery, you couldn't use one that was made anywhere but Indonesia. That was the deal, right? And what happened? Indonesia got really good at doing lithium-ion batteries. It didn't annoy anyone, didn't hurt anyone's bottom line, but Indonesia got really good at doing something. And I think, that's a pretty smart move. And I think we should see more of it around the world.
This is Tech Radio.
Moving on to other big stories this week. You know how we're always kind of lauding the EU in certain ways for saying that the fines that they're imposing on big tech to keep them in line are fantastic, but they could be bigger.
Strong regulation, Dusty. We're a fan of strong regulation.
Yeah. How's this for a fine, though? For a world-beating fine, okay? So you remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, there were all kinds of bans put on Russian people traveling and Russian flights and Russian media outlets being allowed into the EU. YouTube has banned 17 Russian TV channels from the YouTube platform, okay?
Okay.
A Russian judge has fined YouTube 110 million? No. 110 billion? No. 110 trillion dollars. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that is 110 followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 zeros. 110 and 12 zeros at the end, okay? $110 trillion. It's ridiculous because it's roughly the same as the GDP for planet Earth, okay? Not for the States, not for Russia, not for Indonesia, for the entire planet, all right?
Oh, that's
YouTube
funny.
itself, all right, is worth $2 trillion.
Only?
They've been fined $110 trillion. It's like ridiculous. How can you, okay, so your entire worth is 2. Well, I'm going to fine you 110, so pay up.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Anyway, it was a little story that that made me laugh. YouTube are not going to pay it, which is kind of bad news because the judge said that if they don't pay the fine within 9 months, the fine will double every day with no upper limit to the final figure. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Listen, music. You are very into your music, and I love the story you've come up with about AI and how much it's costing our favorite artists. Tell me more.
Yeah, this is a study that came out during the week by a UK mobile phone refurbisher called Music Magpie. And they basically had a look at streaming figures and they had a look at AI generated content. So this is material that would be generated by sites like Udio, for example, where you would go on and you would put in your parameters and you would, generate whatever you want. Of course, we're seeing all kinds of stuff like music written in the style of or covers sung by, all that kind of thing. So first of all, Dusty, are you able to tell the difference between AI generated or real, for want of a better word, music?
Yes.
So
Immediately.
what's the difference to you? Because I think you've got a pretty good ear for these things.
The quality of the recording, you can just tell straight away. The quality of the recording is number one. And then secondly, it's just the way that it's put together.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's music and it's got there's a famous comedy sketch where they said, you've got all the right notes, but then you're just not playing them in the right order.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can tell straight away it's the audio quality, and then also the fact that just the songwriting quality, if you like, is not brilliant. Way better than I could ever do, but just not brilliant.
Yeah. Well, that puts you on the good end of the scale, because believe it or not, a lot of people have trouble telling the difference between AI generated and actual content. So according to this study, 52% of Gen Z, 50% of millennials, and 45% of boomers can't tell the difference between AI and real content.
That's worrying. Going forward, that's very worrying.
Yeah, yeah. So we had a look at some of the biggest losers. I think overall the industry loses something like £10 million sterling as a result of AI generated content. Kind of the biggest losers is an interesting snapshot of the music industry as a whole. I wouldn't have guessed this, but again, I'm showing my age. I don't think you'll be able to guess who the biggest losers are and how much it's estimated they're losing on account of AI. Would you care to throw out a guess as to the act out there that is being the most affected by AI from a revenue perspective?
Oh,
I know who you're going to say.
Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran, one of the big ones, yeah.
Nope. Way down the list. They are not losing big money in the scheme of things. Possibly because they have very, very dedicated fan bases. If you want to make money off something, I mean, people will run to the limited editions, the vinyl, the all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. It's if you want to make money off someone, you want to provide the illusion of that. So you pick somebody maybe mid to slightly upper tier and have a go at it. The biggest losers apparently are K-pop superstars Blackpink. Have you listened to any of their stuff?
Oh yeah, they've had one or two hits this side of the world, but you see, that's kind of interesting that you're saying that one of the biggest losers, and they're not that well known. Blackpink are, anywhere in Asia or Australasia even, Blackpink are bigger than Taylor Swift.
Wow.
It's just because they're not that as big here that you kind of go, well, whatever. Yeah, do you know what I mean? But they are a huge global act. Massive global act. How much are they losing anyway?
About 375 grand. Not a lot. I mean, you wouldn't,
for the amount of money they'd be making.
At it. But yeah, for the amount of money they'd be making. Yeah. Michael Jackson is second. The estate of Michael Jackson is missing out on some money.
Okay, go on.
£262,000 and change.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he's not around to worry about it.
His estate certainly is. But he's not around to worry about it. Then, there's a couple of names that you would imagine: Baby Monster, Kendrick Lamar, Justin Bieber. Right? Compare and contrast. Blackpink are losing 375,000. Justin Bieber, in that context, Dusty, take a guess as to how much he's losing out.
Well, you see, you're going down a list, so I know it'll be less. 375, Justin Bieber, 200 grand.
Do you know what? It's actually less than that. It's just shy of 155 grand. Again, not to be sniffed at, but for the size, I suppose we got to think about where this revenue is coming from, and it's streaming. Yeah. So it's not people going out and buying counterfeit CDs or counterfeit vinyl for €10 or €15 a pop, or €30 a pop for vinyl, because it is not cheap. It streams, so you are looking at streams in the millions to start generating this kind of revenue. So I guess from an exposure perspective, probably pretty damaging. From a financial perspective, not so much. Interesting story, though.
Grant, your mission this weekend is to go out and purchase a CD from Blackpink, all right, just to help make up some of that 375,000. And introduce yourself to some quality K-pop while you're at it. Listen, on a related note, actually, Michael Parkinson was a massively popular TV interviewer in the 70s and 80s. Probably the 90s as well. I can't remember. He's got a new podcast coming up, okay? Interviewing celebrity guests. And the interviews, as you would expect with Parky, they're live and they're unscripted. And he's got a nice sense of humor and all that kind of stuff. The only problem with all of this, right, is that August last year, Michael Parkinson died.
Okay, I see where this is going.
He's no longer with us, right? But what a production company, with the permission of his family, have done is they've built a Michael Parkinson AI based on 2,000 interviews that he has done over the years, along with a whole load of other Michael Parkinson trained stuff. And it's that AI that is going to be doing the interviewing with the celebrities who are popular today. And what's really interesting about it is I said it was live and unscripted, which means that the person will sit down and the AI will go, hello, how are you? Welcome. Tell me about the new album. And then depending on how the person answers, the AI will then follow on the interview to see how it goes, because you don't know which way an interview is going to go.
Okay, two things that I find fascinating there. One is the unscripted thing. That's going to be a real test of AI, and we'll see what kind of conversations it comes up with. The other is with the permission of the family.
Yes.
Because you remember last year we covered a story about George Carlin, that his voice was being used to deliver material that he hadn't written, that it was an AI generated voice. Yep. The family had not given permission for this. They complained, and the AI was promptly retired. So to see, I mean, we are into uncanny valley territory here. I think the data set of 2,000 interviews is fascinating, but not so much, that many interviews on its own, because on this show we've done 1,000, near enough to 1,000. He's had a massively long career though, and he's interviewed an awful lot of really interesting high-level people. Mm-hmm. So I want to hear what kind of conversations he comes up with. Will they be of sufficient depth? Will they have that slightly off the cuff feel? Will people, one of Parkinson's great qualities was that he was able to make people feel very comfortable around him, comfortable saying anything to him, almost to the extent that, you filter out the audience kind of a thing. Now, people who talk to this AI will have to filter out the fact that they're not talking to a real person. Can that be done? What will the quality of the interviews and interviewees, I suppose, be like? I mean, would you step forward and go, do you know what? I wish to be interviewed by an AI and potentially become training data.
I think it will be very good. Firstly, there's full disclosure at this. So they're obviously announcing it now. There'll be full disclosure at the start of the thing. And I think at some point during the podcast, they're also going to ask the guest, how did it feel to be interviewed by an AI? Okay. So it'd be interesting to get the response that you were asking. As for the quality of it, I actually think it will be really good, because the world is just going gaga at the moment with a new feature from Google, Notebook LM. And what you can do is you can just stuff a whole lot of information in it and say, make a podcast out of this. And then you get a male and a female presenter talking about it. Now, it's the same script format and the way they do it over and over and over again. So it gets tired quite quickly. But the quality of it is surprisingly good. And these things are just rocking along, and they're improving at a ridiculous rate. So I think it's going to be the AI Michael Parkinson will be really good. That's what I think it's going to be. I can't wait to hear the podcast when it comes out.
I can't wait to be interviewed by him.
All right, listen, we're out of time for news this week. We were going to mention the results season for Google, but basically one word sums it up. You'll have more details on techcentral.ie, and also Apple results are out conveniently after all these big announcements. So we'll have the results for them as well, all at techcentral.ie. Finally, one thing that we did want to mention was our guest from last week and the festival which is happening this weekend. Remind us.
Yeah, Beta Festival is back, starting on the 1st of November and finishing officially on the 17th. There's a conference going on this weekend, so an awful lot of material is going to be crammed into the first weekend, but for a lot of exhibits, they will be running until the 17th of November. So if you're around town, if you're in Dublin, go check something out.
Niall, as always, thank you very much.
From techcentral.ie, this is the award-nominated Tech Radio from techcentral.ie.
Having strong security is a foundational element of any company's IT system. But is there more involved in keeping the lights on than protecting against bad actors in cyberspace? Whether it's having enough electricity to get you through a power cord, where or how to store your backups, or complying with the latest regulations from the EU, there is a lot more to operational resilience than you might think. Kevin Reid is Chief Technical Officer with SureSkills, and he took Niall Kitson through the challenges which are facing organisations today.
Kevin, when we talk about various computing paradigms, you know, the eternal debate of whether to manage your IT estate either on-premise or off-premise, it never seems to go away. And although we live in a climate of everything's assumed that you're going to be working in the cloud, you're going to be using, you know, your software as a service with an annual subscription, and it's not necessarily something that works for everybody.
No, there's been recent publicity around large-scale companies repatriating their workloads back to on-premise, and this has created a significant discussion about where is the appropriate place to run specific things. There is also the background trend of people moving towards SaaS-based applications, which can be a very economic way to run very complex application stacks without having to own the burden of the infrastructure and the operational management of the platform at the time. So it is this evolving situation where in certain circumstances where you understand your application, you understand your end user capacity needs, you understand the very specific workload characteristics, it can be more effective and more efficient to run it on your own equipment in your own data centers. And there's also the challenge of the class of workload that you're running. Cloud is not a panacea for every single IT problem. It is an environment where you can innovate, where you can scale, where you can do things that is frankly nearly impossible on traditional IT infrastructure on-premise, because it has capabilities that are just not, you just can't squeeze them into your own IT environment. So most traditional workloads, like if you think about the financial software, the contact management software, these traditional things that a lot of organizations run, and at quite a small scale, putting them in the cloud doesn't make any sense because they're less protected than running them on a hypervisor within your own environment than and building that resilience, modifying that application, something that frankly most SMEs will just not do. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, they don't have the skills. So this is just not a sensible use. So that has given rise to a very strong view that hybrid is the way most organizations will land. And it's about identifying the correct location for specific workloads and for specific data sets that are responsive to the end user needs. And that's one of the big decision points that most organizations are going to be faced with over the next coming year or 2 years. Understanding where things should run, to give the appropriate levels of protection and indeed resilience to that infrastructure to ensure that it's there and available to companies, their employees, and their customers.
Leaning into that idea of resilience as opposed to cybersecurity, as terms, occasionally they overlap, but in other occasions they don't. They're quite separate things. So how do we delineate what is about resilience and what is about security?
So resilience is a funny word to use when we come to businesses and operations. Because resilience at its core could be as simple as having sufficient money in the bank to run the organization for the next 3 months if there's a cash flow problem, right up to how do I ensure my IT operations are not affected by any external force or action. It's that ability to continue to process, to continue to operate, even under extremes of difficulty, where they could be, natural disaster, they could be outside actors, they could be a simple case of, and unfortunately very frequent, user error. And it's how do we build systems that can cope with this very wide range of potential problems and ensure that there's two things here. One, we can continue to access the systems, and two, we can trust the data that is within the system. And trust is a big thing here. It's not just enough to have access to a system. You have to know that the data is good. That has significant challenges for where outside actors have actually impacted on your systems. Trusting your systems, trusting your data after that point is a significant problem.
I think that element of trust when it comes to data, people sort of think it's a given that if you have a backup, that it's a reliable backup. Under GDPR, we're finding that people are still storing data on magnetic tape in some cases. So how aware are organizations that, all backups are not created equal?
It's actually quite funny you mentioned magnetic tapes. Magnetic tapes still actually have a place in the IT infrastructure for a couple of different reasons. One, their longevity. If stored correctly, you can get up to 25 years useful life out of a tape, providing you still have the equipment that can actually read it. That's actually a harder problem than the tape itself. And their ability to not be tampered electronically. So if you take a tape backup, stick it in a cupboard, humidity controlled, temperature controlled cupboard, preferably, that tape will be useful to the organization for a generation if they need to go back to that level of data access. Now, for most organizations, that's totally irrelevant because the data that's on there ages out so quickly, it's pointless. The classic example is, financial units within companies say, I need to keep my data for 7 years. So therefore, the backups are kept for 7 years. I've yet to meet an accountant who deletes anything. Last night's backup has 10 years of data in it. I don't need to keep my backups for 7 years. I need to prove that that data is accurate. And that's the proof point, not the backups. And indeed, backups themselves, backups are a very useful tool for the classic problems, end user error, system error, failure, being able to recover data reasonably rapidly. It's not instantaneous. No backup can do that. But it's that idea. I have a point in time that I can compare to current data and say, this data is either corrupt, out of date, or just bad. And I can recover that data. The challenge we have with backups is the older they are, the staler the data is, the bigger the gap within your operations. It could be your financial transactions. It could be email. It could be, a CRM system, anything that you're recording information on. You have a wider gap, and the recovery of that data in the gap becomes a bigger problem, which is why, from a resilience point of view, we say backups are only one tool in how you build out a solution. But also with backups can be tampered with if they're stored electronically, which is the normal way to do it now. Most organizations have moved away from your tape backup. Most organizations go with the three copies, really. So you have your live production copy, you have your immediate backup copy, and then you have a longer term storage. It could be a month end, it could be year end, something. A lot of organizations are now looking at having that fourth copy, which is an immutable air-gapped copy. So when you write that data, you are not allowed to change it, and you can't access it electronically to do anything to it. So that air-gapped copy becomes a critical component in a ransomware recovery, because we know that one hasn't been affected by the ransomware attack itself.
So, Kevin, we've talked about that third backup, which I suppose at an operational level, people are quite familiar with. Ask anyone in the technical end, whether it be a CIO or even somebody on the, for want of a better term, the shop floor, and they will talk about that third backup. You, however, have a strong and fervent belief in a fourth backup and how that would work on an operational level.
Yeah, so the fourth copy has become... It's like a reference copy of the state of your data that you can refer to, you can use, but you can guarantee its quality. And the reason for that is when you store it, it's typically stored as an immutable copy and air-gapped. The air-gapping is so that once the data is written, you can't access the data and make any changes. And the immutability means that even if some of your actual live data is corrupted, it cannot corrupt that backup copy because everything that is written is a new thing. And that can be used to build a picture of the problems that were happening when the attack or the corruption occurred. Because the biggest thing that most people miss about a ransomware or any external actor affecting your data is it's not so much about the recovery of the data. Most ransomware attacks happen long before you're aware of the actual infiltration and attack. Mostly the attacks come in through end users. They infect through typically email. It's one of the biggest vectors for attacks. And they sit within your system discovering endpoints, discovering internal systems, mapping out what your data looks like, what your systems look like prior to actually affecting anything. And the reason they do that is to understand what is of value, what is the biggest impact, how can they actually impact your organization and your data. By doing that, it means that there's no point in recovering from yesterday's data, because the software that is being used to perform the attack is still there. You recover and it just continues. That's no use. You need to go back and find the point where the attack happened and then trace it forward so that you can actually see what the perpetrators did, understand the impact of it, understand the breadth, and be able to remove those malicious software programs so that you can guarantee that you have clean systems. And that's what your air-gapped copy is there for. So you can have a reference copy that you can walk through knowing that the quality of that data is in a known state. So it's this problem that, we build solutions for disaster recovery. And yes, I can have most of your systems back within a couple of hours. But you won't be allowed to use them if you have suffered a ransomware attack and you have invoked cyber insurance. Cyber insurance means that you actually have to have third parties look at your systems, look at your data, and guarantee the quality of that information before you're allowed to put it back into production. That takes time. That takes skills, and typically it's a third party as well. You're not allowed to self-certify, and nor can your disaster recovery provider certify. It needs an external body to look at that data and say that this is good to use, and you're now okay to resume operations. That, unfortunately, is a significant impact on businesses' ability to operate. It's one of the reasons why we say building resilience at the system level is critical, so that you can actually understand if something goes offline, do I have a clean, good copy somewhere else?
And that systems level, it can extend to more than bad actors. I mean, you made reference there to something like natural disasters. I mean, we are looking at things like power supplies, even things at that basic level, if you will.
Yeah, so, and this goes back to initial design choices. I've been in organizations where, they've built server rooms or, personal data centers underneath bathrooms in an office block. You're going, a leak in the bathroom above you is not going to do your servers any good whatsoever. Site it somewhere else. Do not put, make sure that, another good example is an organization that had their server room on the third floor. Perfect. It was a great location. Yeah, the power supplies were in the basement and they were on a floodplain. So, as soon as they flooded, the power went off. So it didn't matter where your server room was. And it's about understanding what are the risks and mapping them out and making sure that you can continue to operate. Again, it's like you can have the most resilient IT systems in the world, but if your end users can't access them, they're no use to you whatsoever. So the challenge of having, say, a fire in the building, if you are working from an office location, if you have a fire in the building, even if your servers are protected, your users aren't allowed in. And they won't be allowed in for several days. So can they access those systems remotely? Has that been robustly tested? If you have secure systems, how do they access them? If people have to move location, what are the mechanisms you're using to ensure that they can continue to access systems? And it's about mapping out these things and making sure that you understand them. Yes, you can go the entire way to very complex, simulations. You can do essentially you can war game the entire process of something going wrong. But you don't always have to go to that level. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, let's list down the things that can happen. Let's walk around our building with fresh eyes and say, what are the points of failure? Do we have power potential issues here? Like, do we have one supplier? Are there building works happening down the street that could cause interruptions to power? That used to be one of the biggest problems in D2 in Dublin. Constant building works from the likes of the LinkedIn buildings, the Facebook, and so on. These buildings were being put up, but what was happening was they were impacting local power supplies, and it was knocking businesses out on a continual basis a number of years ago.
That's interesting that, resilience does extend down to literally choosing what building you decide to locate yourself in. One of the great challenges to resilience in recent years, of course, was COVID, where I think people were forced to reevaluate their IT estates. Have any particular lessons been learned, or now that we're in the throes of this sort of great return to the office, that maybe some old habits are beginning to seep back in?
One of the things that has been impacted, the business of providing site resilience. And there was quite a few businesses that had dedicated suites where you could relocate your workers to. That business has essentially died. And it's died for a couple of very simple reasons. The ability to work from home is your site resilience. It is that idea that, recovery now happens to other data centers. As long as you have access to the internet and your staff can work from home, that's your site resilience plan for the vast majority of organizations now. Unless you're working in a very secure work environment where you're not allowed to work from home, and that would typically be in, you must be dealing with very confidential information. You must be dealing with probably, very high value financial data or very sensitive data, say, be personnel records, something like that. But the vast majority of people can work from anywhere if it's an IT system they need to access. So that was badly impacted by COVID in an unexpected way. The return to office has not been a particular problem. It's actually quite, within IT teams, it's quite welcome, because it's very difficult to foster a sense of team. How do you educate people? How do you ensure everyone is working on the same thing? That was very challenging to do remotely. So that partial return to the office has been quite welcome for a lot of IT teams. But the wider problem for IT and for how IT provisions a business has become a little bit more complex, because how do you get systems out? How do you get laptops delivered? How do you configure them? How do you patch them? How do you ensure they're not being used to stream Netflix at home? These are things that as a corporate device is not meant to do everything. It's meant to be just for corporate. And that clear delineation between home and office assisted that. Now that everybody is working on these devices at home, it's much harder to guarantee that they're clean, that they're only used for the purpose they're meant to be used, and without being draconian as well. I'm not trying to stop someone ordering lunch on a corporate device, but they're not there to play games. They're not there to go and download things. They are there to be used for work purposes only. So the controls and restrictions that have had to be deployed are much more complex now. And that's causing skill problems for a lot of organizations. The management of a remote first, highly dispersed workforce is very significant.
That is something that we're seeing at the moment with large companies like the Amazons, like the Facebooks, like the X's, all engaged in very concerted efforts to bring people back into the office, I suppose, to get a better picture of what their IT estates are and what their operational demands are. Was that another thing that was maybe hidden when people went home from COVID, the actual nature of the resources needed to keep businesses going, seeing as instead of relying on one network, you were relying on everybody's networks to do a job?
Yeah, I don't think it was particularly hidden. I think it was just poorly understood when this was forced upon us, and it was forced. We didn't have a choice if we wanted to continue to operate. We had to allow people to move. So there was a huge catch up during COVID to allow us to manage these estates and to understand. And actually, we've probably come out of it with a better understanding of what we manage than we had beforehand, because we have had to deploy tools and technologies onto all devices to ensure they're controlled. And it has given us a lot more clarity about what exists, about how to manage, about how to deliver systems that are effective for end users in very challenging circumstances. So I think COVID has actually put us in a better position to understand more about our IT estates and have control over our IT estates. But it doesn't mean it's cheaper. It doesn't mean it's easier. And that cost implication is still being felt by organizations today.
Of course, we're talking about sort of cost and, on the ground security issues. However, we also have regulatory issues now coming from Europe with the second network security directive that has come down. Just very briefly, which is probably unfair, but very briefly, if you give us an overview of what it is and how it's actually affecting people at the moment, if it is at all.
So between NIS2 and DORA, there is implications for organizations, but it depends on your industry, it depends on your scale, it depends on the data you're handling. So, and enforcement is not going to be strict for another 12, 18 months, really, because people are adjusting in this period and trying to understand what are the implications. And that is part of the problem. Interpretation is still relatively open. And until someone is actually found in breach of the regulation and it's tested, it's never clear. Like when GDPR came out originally, there was a long period where people were trying to understand how it implicated them and the systems they were running. And until it started to be tested in the real world, and then people could say, oh, in that scenario, I need to do X. And that became very much clearer for people during that process. And I think these regulations are going to be similar. Now, some of them are very clear. If you deal with critical systems, you have to have a resilient infrastructure. You have to be able to recover. You have to have, it's mandatory, you have to have backups. They have to be stored securely. These are things that are fairly obvious, but still some organizations are struggling to cope with them. And now that that's an audit requirement, people are having to invest more into these systems. And that's the challenge. It's like there's a constant investment cycle required to keep security and compliance up to date and aligned with the regulation. And these are never simple systems. You have to have highly skilled workforces to implement and manage and continue to improve all of these environments. And that is it's a difficulty in the current marketplace where, IT skills, even with the layoffs from the big tech organizations, even with those, it is very difficult to gain access to skills at an affordable price in this market.
And that was Niall Kitson chatting with Kevin Reid, Chief Technical Officer with SureSkills. If you'd like to know more, you can visit our website, sureskills.com. And as always, that link is in the description area of this podcast.
This is Tech Radio with Dusty Rhodes and Niall Kitson.
That's it for our show this week. Do check out some of the other stories that we couldn't squeeze into the podcast this week, including...
Yeah, we've got Rethink Ireland has a new fund for the Munster region. Research Ireland backs a heap of early career researchers. And we asked the question, are EV batteries getting better?
You'll find all of those and more online at techcentral.ie. We're back again next Friday with a brand new show for you online and with RT Radio 1 Extra. And do remember, please, to share our podcast with a friend. Just tell them to search for Tech Radio Ireland on Apple, Spotify, or now also on YouTube. Until next time, from myself, Dusty Rhodes, and from Niall Kitson, thanks so much for listening. Have a great weekend.
Remember, you can get the latest Irish tech news with hourly updates, daily newsletters, and more at our website, techcentral.ie. Share the knowledge and invite a friend to listen. Search Apple, Spotify, or YouTube for Tech Radio Ireland, or listen with RTE Radio 1 Extra. Tech Radio is produced by dustpod.io for techcentral.ie. From me, Artemis, live long and prosper.